anyway, who am I? Basically, I had a very modest and humble upbringing. I grew up in a newsagent shop, a typical corner grocery shop. My parents were first-generation immigrant shopkeepers, and like a lot of second-generation people, I grew up in a shop. And I remember working in the shop all hours. We had newspapers in the mornings. It was an off-license. So a lot of my work ethic came from my parents, watching them work in this business. And they only had one shop, one small business, and it was a family business. But like most parents, they wanted their children to go to university study, so I did that. And I decided to go into academia. I also wrote for the Asian papers. And one of the projects I've done is to compile the Asian rich list. So you have the Sunday Times rich list. This was the Asian version of that. So smaller and a bit poorer, generally.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, actually, not anymore. Some good people in there. But, you know, and I saw people from the other side of my parents. We were there with one shop, but you've got these global entrepreneurs now, big names, big people. They sell around the world. We're not just associated with corner shops anymore. So there's been a lot of changes, and it's been a fantastic story to tell. So the book really took the rich list, and you know how I interview these people year on year, and it really captured their stories. So I'll just give you a flavour of some of these people. Now, Shami Ahmed is the owner of the legendary Joe Bloggs, the jeans people. Now, he started off very, very humbly selling in a market stall in Burnley. His family, his parents, they had this market stall, and him, his brothers, his sisters, they all worked together in this market stall. Later on, they developed, they brought some shops and then a cash and carry, and then they were actually supplying clothes to other people, so producing them, very much the sweatshop sort of image. And Shami and his sister Bushra, because you very rarely, although Bushra is the eldest, it's very much a patriarchal society, where Shami was heading up the company. But Shami decided really to create a brand of jeans that he could own. He was sewing clothes for other brands. He thought, let's create our own. And so the legendary Joe Bloggs came about because he wanted any old Joe Bloggs to be able to buy designer jeans. That was his concept. And it was phenomenally successful, because then Debenhams was selling it. It was all around Europe, most of the UK. It was a recognised top 10 jean in the UK. So very, very successful. He then, of course, he is a bit of a wide boy. He likes the press. He wants to be out and about, and he wants to get to know people. But he then joined forces at one point. One of the partnerships he had was with Elizabeth Emanuel. Now, you're far too young, but some people may remember Elizabeth Emanuel made the wedding dress for Princess Diana, you know, William's mother. And so she was a very famous designer. She designed that wedding dress. And you think, how on earth could a woman like Elizabeth Emanuel, haute couture, you know, mixing with the rich and famous, really rub shoulders with Shami Ahmed, who grew up with a market stall in Burnley? But she needed the money. He had the money. He had the premises. You know, it was actually a marriage of great inconvenience, as it turned out. She wanted to be flying around the world, meeting celebrities, going on first-class trips. He wanted her in a warehouse in Wembley producing clothes for his range. They didn't really get on at all. She walked out, and he kept her name because that's what he'd paid for. They went into court, and really he'd paid for the name. So he, at one point, was selling Elizabeth Emanuel clothes, and she wasn't allowed to use her own name. So, you know, so the lesson there is be careful who you go into partnership with. It really is a powerful lesson. Now, this guy, Surinder Arora, very modest guy. He's a Sikh from India, and he owns the Aurora International Hotel. So if you go on the Bath Road to Heathrow Airport, there's the Aurora International Hotel. He also owns the Sofitel Hotel in Terminal 5, the new Sofitel Hotel, and he's got 14 hotels around the UK, big major hotels. And he started off, he came from India when he was 13 years old, struggled at school. He could speak Punjabi. The teachers didn't like that. They wanted him to speak English. So, you know, for somebody like that, dropped out of school, got a job for British Airways, wanted to be a pilot. He dreamt of being a pilot, but that was never going to be the case. And then, you know, then started selling financial policies. So, and then later on, bought a derelict house on the Bath Road, and then brought up houses next to each other, then had to fight to get planning permission to get those houses torn down, and then to get a hotel built up. So it's that drive, that determination. Obviously this wasn't instant, it didn't happen all at once. And really, and he persisted and persisted, and everybody said to him, don't do this, you don't know what you're getting into. But he persisted, got the first Aurora International, well, it's called the International Hotel, but that hotel was not really for people like you and I. It was the first hotel for crew only. He had a hotel purpose-built for airline crew. It was for British Airways at that time. Now other airlines use it. So, you know, it was because they have to have rest periods of a certain time. They've got to have silence. They've got to know when the flights are leaving. So that was his concept, you know, having something right. And really, you know, very, very successful. He's even bought a hotel in Manchester with Cliff Richard. You can't get much better than that. So this guy you might recognise definitely from the next one. Yep, the Cobra. If you go to any Indian restaurant today, you can get Cobra Lager. Now, Karan Moria, a little bit, he's not a rags to riches story. He was born into a family of army people. His father was in the army, his grandfather was in the army, and he was expected to go into the army. But instead, he came to the UK, studied. While he was a student, he was living in digs at the YMCA, and he remembered going to try and get cheap Indian food in restaurants, and really thinking that the drinks there, you know, it was sort of, an idea was planted at the time that the drinks, the wine and the beer was too heavy to go with that food. Anyway, he then went on to Cambridge University because he's obviously very bright. He left Cambridge £20,000 in debt, and then got a few jobs, but then got together with a friend of his, and they were sitting there and they were trying to work out a business that they could run. And what they did was they pulled together all their resources. They wrote a list of everybody they knew, their uncles, their aunts, you know, anybody they knew, and they found out that most of their contacts were in India. So then they were trying to look for a business concept. What can we do? And they tried a lot of ideas that didn't work. And then Karen kept going back to when he was a student, going to these Indian restaurants, and he knew there were lots of Indian restaurants in the UK. I mean, every high street has got a few hundred. And so he wanted to brew lager. And people thought, what an idiot. You know, in England, there are pubs in every street corner. The Danes are known for brewing lager. Why are you, an Indian, in a country that is practically teetotal? Why would you go back to India, brew lager and bring it back to the UK? It was ludicrous. But he persisted, and he had a lot of trouble because when you go to India, you've got all the red tape there. You try and brew it. And what happened is, even when they labelled the bottles, the labels were wonky. Waitrose are not going to sell a bottle with wonky labels. It was little things like that. It was the detail. But he persisted, and Cobra were, you know, extremely well known. I know they've had problems as well, but, you know, it is a brand that's known, and he's certainly done well out of it, elevated to the House of Lords, and now obviously is part owner of the company. So that's one thing. Now this guy, not known, Dinesh Dameja, but you've all heard of ebookers.com, yes? He founded ebookers.com. So once again, started off quite modestly with a kiosk in Earl's Court Station, selling tickets. And in those days, if you were buying an airline ticket, somebody would write it out for you, and you know, you would get a piece of paper. Now you just press the button on the internet and you get a ticket instantly. But then it was really, really slow. But he was at the forefront of actually mechanising the whole industry, and he got his software from Germany. So he got the software from Germany, but to get the funding, it was funding he found so difficult to get into the UK, and it was only when he went to the US that the US were way ahead in terms of the internet and realising that the potential of it, and so he got his money in America. And he bought it back. But his company, ebookers.com, he's always said, whatever you do, no matter how much money you make, be as tight-fisted as possible. So whereas all the other .com companies, they were having lavish parties, you know, having a lot of fun, he'd be going around turning off the lights in all the buildings. You know, he'd really tighten his belt. So when the .com bubble burst and a lot of these offices were empty, he survived, but only just. So really, you know, tighten your belts and really keep a hold on it. He sold the company for £100 million to Hertz, you know, eventually, and is now living very well. Now this is Firoz Kassam. Now you may have heard of the Kassam Stadium in Oxford, some of you. Basically Firoz Kassam, he made his money from B&Bs. You know, he'd buy houses, he'd rent sort of space and get bigger and bigger premises. And what he found was that, you know, he grew up and he got some hotels and things, but he found that a lot of his rooms were just empty because the tourist trade is seasonal. He just wasn't, and he didn't have the Ritz or anything. He had very sort of rundown kind of places. And he wasn't doing well. The rooms were empty. He was desperate. And the government at that time were trying to house asylum seekers and refugees, and he thought, wow, demand equals supply. I've got empty rooms, they need rooms. And so he was getting a lot of government contracts and people coming in. So he was accused in many ways of really making a lot of money on the back of homeless people. But for him, he thinks it's pure economics, you know, demand equals supply. And that was the basis of his fortune. He actually owns a Holiday Inn in King's Cross. King's Cross now as well. So, you know, his sort of bricks and mortar businesses were doing really well. But being an entrepreneur, you're never satisfied. You always want something else. You always want something else. You're always striving for more. And I think people get bored with managing the day-to-day business. They like the idea. They like the dream. They want to get out there. And so like a lot of guys or a lot of people, he wanted a football club. And at that time, Oxford United needed an owner because they were in a lot of trouble. The stadium was in trouble. It hadn't passed its health and safety spec, and it was a troubled club. He bought the club for £1, but with that came about £18 million of debt. So he had to really get it up to speed. But the trouble is, if you're a man, if he was a very private man, and when you own buildings and hotels, you can be very private and very closed about your business. If you own a football club, anybody with a season ticket thinks they can run it better than you. And he found that very, very difficult. He wasn't popular. He wasn't seen as a football player or part of that business. He wasn't cool enough. He wasn't really a footballer. But he said, no, I'm a businessman. I'm here to save the club. So he wasn't really pretending, but it was a tough journey. And he'd really bitten off more than he could chew. He did build the stadium. It's got his name on it, but he said he really wished he hadn't touched it. You know, it really hurt him. I think it ended up in divorce and a lot of other things. So, but this is Ghulam Noon. He's another famous guy. If you go to Sainsbury's, Birdseye, the Marks and Spencer's, the Indian chilled and frozen food that you buy is made by Noon. So his company was Noon Products PLC, but he goes under different names. So he'll go under the Birdseye label or Marks and Spencer's. So he was born in Mumbai, and he lost his father at an early age, and that's what they say with a lot of successful entrepreneurs. They assume responsibility at an early age, and that's what he did. And so he had to really fend for all his brothers and sisters. But he always said he had fire in his belly. Mumbai wasn't enough for him. He wanted a bigger platform. So he came to the UK and got into partnership with some friends of his, and they have Royal Sweets, which to this day is running. It's Indian Sweets, and it's a franchise. It's very, very successful. He then went to America, and he tried to open Indian foods in America, in New York. But the American market wasn't ready for Indian food. It's not like here where you've got a large Indian population. It's a bigger minority here, whereas in America it really didn't take. And he came back, he'd lost a lot of money, but he said entrepreneurs never fail, they just learn expensive lessons. So he came back with that, and then with that knowledge he built a factory in Southall, which is in West London, employed a lot of people. It's very, very successful. He's built 2 other factories and has been successful. Very much a family concern. His daughters, his son-in-laws, they're in the business with him. So very much that close sort of Indian family business, although he has a lot of external people. You know, he does pay good salaries and he does get people in, and some people don't, and the business stays small because they don't get that expert outside advice. So that's that. These 2 brothers, Vijay, he started the business. It's Waymade PLC, so it's a pharmaceutical company in London, and it's very, very they export to over 80 countries worldwide. Very, very successful. Now, these brothers, they had a widowed mother, so they lost their father early as well, and were brought up in Kenya, but were extremely poor. And Vijay now, even though he's a multimillionaire, he said even now he won't stop working. He's still scared. He's still scared of being poor, and that early poverty, that's what drives him. So they started off with one chemist shop and then built up, and then decided to buy wholesale, but then it started producing the drugs. So very, very complex business now, and much bigger. Praveen Vasi is very successful. She's up in Derby and owns S&A Foods, which also produce, they produce foods for Asda, Indian chilled food for Asda. Now, she's got an interesting story because she's married to a GP in Derby. So, you know, domesticated life, she didn't have to work. But she was always frustrated with the quality of Indian food in the shops. She obviously hadn't tasted Noon's products then. But, you know, she said, oh, this isn't authentic. It's somebody with a recipe and trying to make Indian food. And she always felt her food was good, and she was desperate to get it on the supermarket shelves. She started by making finger foods for a local takeaway. So then she was supplying to a lot of takeaways, samosas, bhajiya, pakore, things like that. And so she was using her kitchen at home, hiring a few other women who'd come, they'd cook in her kitchen, they'd supply to the local takeaways, and really that's what she kept on doing for a while. But each time she kept writing letters and sending them to the big supermarkets, trying to convince them of her products. Anyway, nobody responded until finally Asda invited her to take part in a blind food tasting competition. So her food was there alongside others, and hers was deemed to be the tastiest. So she got a contract, and she said that was really frightening. So to be a woman in your own kitchen cooking one day for local takeaways, suddenly to get a contract from Asda, you know. So she had to go into partnership with somebody with a factory, and then, you know, that's how the story went on. She still supplies Asda, still is phenomenally successful, and you know, is doing really, really well. So this just gives you a flavour of the businesses that I featured in my book, which is in Amazon. And, you know, I do sincerely hope, it's been a pleasure meeting you. I hope you make your fortune, and I hope you read Making Your Fortune. Thank you. Well, that's a good question, because I think a lot of these are kind of the older sort of first generation guys, and what they always turn to other business people in their community first of all, always their accountant for advice. Yeah. So sort of financial advice, but it's sort of emotional support, so other people in the community. But you see, there's that sort of contention, because they wanted to keep their business very private, and there's something about trust and letting outsiders into your business. You want to keep it private, but at the same time, if you want to grow, you have to let others in. And the businesses that were successful were the ones that allowed outsiders in to give them advice. So mentoring is extremely powerful. It's an interesting question. It's something that we discussed. I mean, I take the entrepreneurship courses. I'm from the University of Westminster, so we teach well, you can't really teach entrepreneurship. We try and nurture entrepreneurs. And the thing is, right, it's important, because I think if you're saying entrepreneurs have to be born, then we have to find out which ones of you are born, and then pick out the ones that are born and give them the land, labour, capital, resources they need to be entrepreneurial. If we say they can be made, then we have to say what are the skills they require, and how can they get those skills, or how can they find other people that can help them and support them within the team. So I would say entrepreneurship sometimes is a positive choice. Other times you're pushed into it because you've lost your job or you haven't got a job. So you don't always have the same journey, you know. It's not always that choice. I would say a reality check, really. I think really know what's out there, know your market, because I find what people glamorise business, and the number of people who've said to me, I'm going to start a magazine. Now, the reality of having a magazine from scratch, if you're not part of a publishing company, you know, empire, is ridiculous. You're not going to make money out of selling magazines from readers. You're going to get it from the advertising and publicity. So I think people don't always realise what they're going into. They glamorise it. It's actually a lot of work, but I think it's really keeping your eyes open and really looking at the market and understanding it. And it's so fast moving, the market. It's changing so quickly. So, you know, and being able to sell yourself, because people buy you. They don't always buy your clothes. They don't always buy your food, but they buy you, and therefore they will be loyal to you. That's a brilliant question. I'd say no, we're not doing enough. I think we've moved in the right direction, and I actually think shows like The Apprentice and Dragon's Den and all that have helped bring it to the forefront. But I know when I was at school, you never ever thought of entrepreneurship. You're going to be a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, whatever, something safe. You were not told go out, start your own business. And I think that was a mistake. I think it's changing. I think maybe certain schools are getting to be more entrepreneurial, having entrepreneurship competitions. We're getting more role models, you know, like Tim and other people in the media. So it's changing slowly, and I know universities are coming up to speed. America are so far ahead of us, and they have this program called Lemonade Day, where little 6-year-olds are taught to make lemonade. So they make, they buy lemons, they buy sugar, water, they make lemonade, they go and sell it, and then with the profits, a third of it they have to save, a third of it they have to give to charity, and a third they reinvest in the business. So the one thing I think isn't very glamorous, I think it was the hard work. With all of them, even now when they could really step off and they could step away, they still were hands-on 24/7, and I think they were passionate about the business, and sometimes you can't detach the business from the family, from the man, it's inside them. So they really loved their job, and you couldn't prize them away from it. So I think that passion is very, very important. And when things go, and they've all had tragedies, as it were, the businesses have never been smooth. And so I think that's what kept them going. It's that utter self-belief and that belief in the business. Yes. I mean, I think that's a good question, because as an entrepreneur, I think writing the book, you have to be more entrepreneurial. And I was commissioned to write the book because you pitch the idea to the publishers and then they commission it, which means that they will do the marketing and they will do that. But they only do that if you have proved that you can sell it yourself, and that you know the community. So you have to write a business plan for the book, in effect, to get it. I think I had the media backing because I was writing the Rich List, so I had that newspaper bit, and I had the university and the students, so I could pitch it to my own students and other students. And I did a lot of speaking engagements. I mean, I thought it was a lot of hard work, but I love it. And I mean, I've waived my fee today because you're not paying me, but it is with love, obviously, because I'm getting so much back. So I was really talking to everybody. I went around the country. I sort of did anything that I could. I addressed as many audiences as possible. And you do have to. You write blogs. You have your LinkedIn. You have your social media. But I think you have to make a lot of effort. And I was emailing people and sending things out. So really, but also I think with books, you never make money from books. I mean, they're not money makers in themselves. They're a calling card, and they are a way of selling the rest of your business. So I would get more out of a speaking engagement than I would from selling the books. But it's just writing blogs, and getting on. And I think the other gentleman with the training for the restaurants. I mean, really, that's great, because you're using a book to open the door to your training business, which is what it's used for. So maybe even go to some of the universities and put it on their reading lists and things like that. And in fact, you could do that because it's a specialist subject. But writing the book in itself really made me grow up. I think I learned a lot just from that experience in every way. Well, yeah, I think there is a shift towards technology type businesses. I mean, we get the food and some students, they've got no imagination. It's another shop on campus, which they're not allowed to have. So they don't think beyond their little space. But I think technology businesses, definitely. But we're lucky because we've got such a diverse group of students. We've got students from over 80 countries at the University of Westminster in the business school. So therefore, I think if you get people from different backgrounds coming together together. The synergy and the group work is amazing. So more than if it was two people from the same country. So therefore they broaden their outlook and they think, well, that worked in China, maybe that could work here, or something works in India, but it would never work here. So it's really having a global outlook. So I think people are more outward facing now, whereas I think before, when I was growing up, they were very much a micro business. You couldn't see beyond a shop front, really. I think here we've got to have a culture of enabling failure as well. I think we're very hard on people. You know, you've got league tables, you've got success criteria, but I think it's allowing people to practice things, try things, because you never have that trial. You guys will lose money if you don't do well. So everybody's always under a lot of stress. But I think with America, I think they start that independence culture quite early. They're more articulate, so they're better at pitching. I think they're very good at selling themselves. But in terms of the business ideas, they do lots of little things. So even if they have like a rounders match or something, there'll be people selling things there, and a lot more activity at those events. I mean, there's an ethical argument here. You think, is that right? Should we be doing that from such an early age? So there's all those sorts of arguments. But I think it is very much. You know, money, even in the Asian culture, money is respected. If you make a lot of money, that is seen as a good thing. I think in British society before, you weren't meant to talk about money, and you weren't, there's a certain sort of thing about having wealth, whereas we could not flaunt it, but, I think we can, the theory is if you are rich, you can give to others, you can help your family, you can help the community, and you can give charity. So the wealthier you are, the more you can help people. So it's really viewing money in a healthier way as well.